in. I want to welcome all of you to our annual Constitution Day commemoration. So we celebrate today the signing of the U.S. Constitution on September 17, 1787. And each year we invite a speaker to give a talk related to the Constitution and helping to tie it to issues that we're living with today. And today we're honored to have Sarah Augustine, Professor Sarah Augustine with us, who's taught at Heritage and is teaching at Heritage, but also is the director of the Dispute Resolution Center for Yakima and Kittitas counties. And her talk today is The Movement for Racial Justice, the Second Amendment, and the Reshaping of the United States, a topic I'm excited to hear about. So pull out your U.S. Constitution apps and look up the Second Amendment, and we'll give it to Sarah. So welcome, Sarah.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Hi, Blake. I see your hand waving. I first wanted to just thank every single person who's taking the time to be here. It's great to be on Zoom. Actually, I feel it's quite democratizing. I love seeing students next to faculty and administrators. I'm not in the front of the room. I'm just one little square among all the other squares. And so I love that. It's great to see you. Thanks for sharing your noon hour with us. I do want to make a special shout out to Felisa. I see your picture there. Oh my gosh, it's so good to see you. Good to see your picture at least. And to everyone, yeah, thank you. And for everyone else, oh, it's so good to see you. Felisa, a dear friend and student, but no longer a student, now a professional in her own right. Good to see you. And so I'm going to get started. I'm going to share my screen with you so you can follow along with my PowerPoint presentation. Let me do that. Okay, and so let's see if I can. There. Okay.
There we go.
So I'm afraid that my title is a little sexier than I meant for it to be. I'm going to be talking about the First Amendment today.
Oh.
I'm sure the Second Amendment would be really fascinating on this topic, but today I'll be talking about the First Amendment. So I apologize for any misunderstanding there may be there. So let's just first talk about, introduce the Constitution as a document. It's certainly been the most profound document in the shaping of the United States, the country that we share and that we are all a part of, living together within these national boundaries. So I've just put some sentiments here from past leaders and historical figures about the Constitution and its place in our society. So Henry Clay says the Constitution was made not merely for the generation that then existed, but for posterity, unlimited, undefined, endless, perpetual posterity. And our country is still shaped by the Constitution. And then also something that I find fascinating, Patrick Henry says, our Constitution is an instrument for the people to restrain the government. All right, and then finally, Abraham Lincoln says, this country with its institutions belongs to the people who inhabit it. Whenever they shall grow weary of the existing government, they can exercise their constitutional right of amending it or exercise their revolutionary right to overthrow it. So here's some ideas about the Constitution and what it is, what it's designed to be, and how we've interpreted it over the years. So first I just want to ask, does the Constitution legitimize inequity? So because we're together in this space, in this sort of democratized space, I want to just put that out there and ask that question for a response. So I'm going to just let you know, my students, former students would know this. I'm a Native woman, so I'm prepared to wait a long time. Silence doesn't make me uncomfortable. So let me just ask you this question. Does the Constitution itself, as a document, legitimize inequity?
Well, certainly the 3/5 clause seems to suggest, you know, a formalized system of inequality.
All right. So I'm just paging down to that one because I think, Blake, that's a common source of conversation. Let's just talk about what this clause says. It's really talking about how the House of Representatives, how you'll know how much representation you're going to have. And so this clause defines how we're going to determine the population within each state. So it says representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within the union according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, and 3/5 of all other persons. So I just want to put this in context for a moment. There's a debate during the Constitutional Congress at this time trying to determine how representation is going to happen. Of course, that representation means power, right? So the states who have more representative power are going to have more say in what happens. So there is really a conflict with southern states who want to make sure that they're going to have their fair share of power. And so this compromise is struck because they're saying we want for all of our slaves to be counted, although those are going to be non-voting persons. Of course, the Constitution said, hey, you know who's going to determine who gets to vote? The states will determine that. But I think it was a foregone conclusion at this time that slaves would not be voting. So this compromise is struck. We want to make sure that the southern states want to make sure that they're going to have as much representation as they can, acknowledging that counting a slave as a whole person is not realistic because they're actually not voting. Okay, so regardless of that context, what this does is it makes slavery a part of the Constitution. So the Constitution that we still use today, that is a part of our understanding of who we are as a nation, has enshrined within it justification for slavery, right? So this isn't saying, hey, slavery is bad or wrong. It's saying slavery is reality, and this is how we're dealing with it at this time, right? So other ideas, are there other ways that you think the Constitution legitimizes inequity? Just go back up there so we can.
Excluding Indians.
One more time.
Excluding Indians, the other phrase in that amendment or that article.
Right. In fact, the only racial group that's actually named by race in the Constitution are Indians. And there is some discussion about their status in terms of not paying taxes because they're also not American citizens, right, at this time.
Right.
Yeah.
Sarah?
Yes.
Miguel?
Hi, Miguel.
I also believe that based on the language of the Constitution, people that pay taxes should be represented, and something that a lot of people have a hard time understanding is that even though you might be undocumented, that's a word I'm using, not illegal, undocumented, we also pay taxes. When we get a check, taxes are deducted. Although a lot of people cannot claim unemployment or Social Security or a lot of benefits, but taxes are always deducted. So just thinking about that.
Right, and in Washington State, sales tax, right? So all persons here that are, living and breathing in Washington State are paying sales tax as well. And so I think it's a really important point you're making, that the Constitution acknowledges that those who are paying taxes should be represented. And that is a form of inequity that we're facing right now in our world today, as unrepresented people are paying taxes in a variety of ways and are not represented. Other ways that you think the Constitution legitimizes inequity?
Does this include the amendments, like the 13th Amendment, or are we just sticking with?
Sure, but take it away. What have you got to say?
Well, famously, the 13th Amendment does not abolish slavery, but just relocates it into the prison system. And then, of course, once that happens, there's a radical demographic inversion with our prison population.
So could you repeat just a little bit louder? I'm not sure if that picks up on the recording.
Yeah, the 13th Amendment, which allegedly abolishes slavery, doesn't really abolish it. It just moves it into the prison system. So it says there will be no slavery except for duly convicted criminals. And Michelle Alexander's new Jim Crow and the brilliant documentary, The 13th, sort of showcases the way by which the 13th Amendment was used to develop a modern day Jim Crow, a modern day slavery system with the rise of the convict lease system and these things.
Yeah, and so the 13th Amendment is how it was constructed is also open to interpretation. Of course, you name that slavery is still legitimate within the prison system, which is exactly right. And we see that played out in a variety of ways today, including through the incarceration, the mass incarceration of people of color. Is one of the most just hard-hitting examples of the way that legacy goes forward. You bet.
Joel Thome also posted in the chat a comment that including the Bill of Rights, the Constitution provides a governmental structure that restricts, at least better than previous governments, the government's ability to infringe on individual liberties, which is one way of promoting equity.
That's right. In fact, the Constitution, or the framers of the Constitution, very much saw themselves as guaranteeing rights and creating an opportunity for equity in a way that the world had not seen, or at least the European world had not seen up until that point. So one other thing that I want to touch on here just briefly in my research and preparing for this talk is Article 4, Section 2, Clause 3, which says that no person held to service or labor in one state under the law that is escaping into another shall, in consequence of any law or regulation, be discharged from such service or labor, but will be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. So to me, this is the Fugitive Slave Clause. It says that if a slave escapes from one state and moves to another state where there is no slavery, they will have to be returned. They'll be viewed as property and returned to the state where they were residing before that. And so this, in the conversation at the time of the Constitutional Congress, was seen as a way of protecting property, right? Because the Constitution, one of the most important parts of the Constitution, or from my point of view, perhaps the most important discourse, was protecting private property. The protection of private property is a core value in the United States from my point of view. And so this is another way of sort of enshrining slavery into the core document of our country. Okay, so my next question is, we've been talking about, okay, there's inequity in the Constitution, but is the current uprising also protected by the Constitution, right? So we're going to talk about, some tension there. I mean, the Constitution isn't just one thing. So it perhaps has a history of inequity. Does it also does it also provide protection for this current uprising that we are experiencing now together, Black Lives Matter, and a call for racial equity in the United States?
So it depends by what you mean as to the peaceful assemblies. Then yeah, if we're talking about being again, then no. But it's
Okay, I'm not sure that I caught that. You were kind of coming in and out from what I heard, but I think what you said, and I'm not sure who is speaking because I can only see a few faces here. But I think what you said is that if it's a peaceful protest, then from your point of view, it would be protected, and if it's a violent protest, then perhaps not protected. Is that right?
correct.
Okay. Others.
I think I agree with the last person that just commented on that. There's also been like marches. There's people that just simply peacefully march, and that seems to go better, and I think they are protected by doing that. But when it's more like a riot, then that's when things go really wrong. So that's my opinion.
Great, thank you for sharing that. So from your point of view, there's probably constitutional protection when it's a peaceful, or from the way we would sort of determine a legal protest where there's permission and so on.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about this a little bit. So I'm going to look at the First Amendment. So it says Congress will make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So this is the First Amendment that is a protection of the rights of the people in the United States to assemble and to petition the government for redress of our grievances. And so often, when I think about the First Amendment, what I often readily remember is the right to peaceably assemble, and not really think about often petitioning the government for redress of grievances. So what does that mean, petitioning the government for a redress of grievances? Assuming that there is a grievance because harm has occurred as a result of the behavior, the action of the government, people have the right to petition the government for redress. So they have the right to object and to demand account, right, or redress, that it would be addressed. So I'm gonna give another quote here from, this is Thomas Jefferson, and he's one of the framers of the Constitution, and he says here, "I hold it that a little rebellion now and then is a good thing and as necessary in the political world as storms in the physical world." So he says, "Unsuccessful rebellions indeed generally establish the encroachments on the rights of the people which have produced them. An observation of this truth should render honest Republican governors so mild in their punishment of rebellions as not to discourage them too much. It is a medicine necessary for the sound health of government." So this is something that Thomas Jefferson endorses and says, hey, you know what? Revolution is important. Rebellion is important because it's necessary for the health of government. So this isn't in the Constitution, but this is the opinion or point of view of one of the framers of the Constitution. So I'm just, because I've brought up Thomas Jefferson, I have to also include the next slide here. This quote is from Shannon Lanier, who's the 6th great-grandson of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. So he says of Thomas Jefferson, in fact, he's standing here in front of the memorial, Thomas Jefferson Memorial, And he says, we can't just look at history as a one-sided narrative. We have to tell this full story, even if it's painful and even if it's hurtful. We can't get to a place of healing and reconciliation until we address it. So he's really speaking here to the fact that his 6th-time great-grandfather owned slaves, chose not to free his slaves, and that he is a product of his relationship with a woman that he owned. And so this is also something we have to take seriously when we're thinking about sort of what the Constitution is, its role in the shaping of our country today. So why do we care about all of this anyway? What is the point of having this conversation? Why does it matter what the original framers thought? What does it matter what the actual text of the Constitution says? Does it actually have an impact on us today? Why do we care about what that document says, or the institutionalization of inequity? What impact does it have on our country now, 231 years after the signing of the Constitution? Actually, this is 231 years after the ratification of the Constitution. So I'm using the ratification date. Why do we care? What does it matter what the Constitution says?
Well, the Constitution was designed to protect the rights of the people. And it was just certain people, of course, we already know that. During that time, or even now, we deal with we deal with the way that it was written and the place that it was written. But we need to know it because we need to know what the rights are. And even going back to, because I was looking at that part when you said about the redress of grievances. And so you're supposed to be able to make a complaint without the fear of being punished. Mm-hmm. And if we know that, if we know that, hey, I'm supposed to be able to do this, this is my right. But, even looking at these pictures and seeing how, Colin was, he spoke up and there was punishment. And even with some of the protests that are going on and people calling them riots because of whatever some might be riots, but more peaceful than riots. There have been people that have been punished and hurt even with that, and the Constitution is supposed to be for the people. And so that's why it's important that we know, we understand it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is just, Gloria, thank you for your comments. And what you're saying has caused me to think about an op-ed that I read in the New York Times, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks ago, where the writer said, what would our country be like now if the revolutionaries had peacefully protested at the Tea Party, the Boston Tea Party? What if they had chosen to protest peacefully at that time? And I just thought that was a really poignant question. That is a key question from my point of view, because who gets to determine whether a protest is legitimate or not? So you're protesting the state, and the state determines whether your protest is legitimate, right? So from the point of view of the revolutionaries in the forming of the United States, they felt that Britain, the state in charge at that time who had legal authority, did not, they said, we no longer acknowledge the legitimacy of your government, and we are going to, we're going to do something different instead. And so we're now in this very tumultuous time of struggling over that legitimacy, right? And so, and that's happening also in terms of figuring out what are legitimate tactics, in a context where you have grievances that have been unaddressed for so long. So let's talk about that for a moment. What are the grievances expressed by the current uprising? And I'm using the word uprising because I think protest is too small. I think riot is inaccurate. It's an uprising. It's going on across the country and the world. What are the grievances that are being expressed? Let's talk about that for a minute. What are we talking about here? Why are people in the street?
Well, I think they're in the street because their fundamental rights are being violated. I mean, there's the idea of search and detain. There's, you know, the idea that you can be, you know, treated differently. And the last example that I think really illustrated that is a 17-year-old is allowed to carry a rifle in the streets, shoot people, and you know, is almost applauded, not detained. And other individuals, because of their race, color of their skin, you know, could be clothes, are detained, and they're not treated the same. And so I think that's the uprising, I think, has, you know, people are recognizing that that is wrong. And I think it's people who recognize justice and want, you know, peace, but you can't have peace without justice. And I think that's why people are rising up.
Okay, so Mel, what I heard from you is that this person, a young person, his Second Amendment right is protected, right? He's able to charge down the street with a weapon. I remember watching the video of this young person who was actually raised his arms, who was trying to surrender to the police, who didn't even acknowledge him at all. He was able to just run right by because, you know, they were not focused on him, right? And so what we have is a situation where there are some people whose rights are protected and other people whose rights are not protected. And so we see that kind of inequity, and it's been going on a long time, right? So I'm going to kind of try and drill down again. Why does it matter if inequity is rooted in the founding documents? And I guess what I want to sort of pull out of that, or what I'm wondering, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, everyone here, is whether that kind of essential and crucial formative understanding of who we are together as a people. Slavery is legitimate. Discrimination is legitimate. Does that have an impact on the laws and policies and the way they're carried out into the future? Now we're talking about institutional discrimination, right? This is not just about prejudice or the way we feel inside. This is about the way that we express what justice is in our country. And so is justice being expressed in our institutions as for only some people and not others? What do you think about that? It was a lot of words, Sarah. Cut it down.
So when I watched the horrific video of George Floyd being killed with a knee on his neck by someone we pay taxes to employ, I mean, I knew this. I've been involved in thinking, but when I saw that, my heart and soul knew that our institutions are filled with bias, and those with legal authority can express that violence in killing those they are supposed to help. So yes, we're filled with institutional racism, and it's going to take all of us to undo it.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. I think that's, I think the sentiment that you're expressing is probably shared by many people. When we're actually watching it happen in video, it's hard to deny it. I mean, it's just impossible to deny it. So for many of us in this room, we've experienced institutional racism ourselves in our lives, in our bodies, friends and family members. And so for some, it's just, it's a foregone conclusion. They understand it. And for others of us, we're experiencing it perhaps with a level of clarity we haven't before, because we're seeing it in video and being videoed so that you can't deny it. It's impossible to deny. Yeah.
Sarah, there was Sol was raising his hand to say something.
Please. Yes, I'm sorry. But just shout out there. Thank you, Sol. I can't see you. I can only see 4 squares because I have my PowerPoint presentation open. So please.
Yeah, thanks, Gloria. Yeah, I just sort of wonder what you think about, I mean, as a response to your question, and see what you think about this. Michel Foucault, in a series of lectures he gave called Society Must Be Defended, made the bold thesis that modern nation states, as they derive from the political philosophy of Europe, aren't born with a cessation of war, but are codified in the mud and blood of war. And I think some of the founding documents, the Constitution, as you point out, the Fugitive Slave Clause, as Blake pointed out, the 3/5 Compromise Clause, the 13th Amendment, but then beyond the Constitution, the whole history of federal Indian law or apartheid in the United States. I mean, these really reveal to us that what we call the United States does not begin from a position of peace, nor does it end with a position of peace, but it's actually codified warfare against Black bodies, against Indigenous bodies. And so when we're thinking about uprisings and we're thinking about inequities that are recurring, we have to really think that we're not ever starting from a position of peace, that the state is able to sort of justify its monopoly on violence by forwarding this false historical narrative that the state begins from a position of peace, but it doesn't. It begins as a form of codified warfare.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're bringing forward there, Sol. And in fact, in reading sort of research, preparing for this, there was this discussion, there was quite a debate during the Civil War times, because this idea of trying to peacefully make incremental and small change over time was not, it was not effective, right? And so basically there were people who felt that the Civil War, I mean, I guess there's scholars today who feel that the Civil War was an expression of the Constitution at its best, because there was an ability to use, Congress could declare war and there could be a war to resolve the issue, as opposed to working it out politically or in another way. And so war as a remedy is also enshrined in the Constitution, just as you're saying. And I agree with that. And I also take your point that that the entire birthing process or the context of the United States was not a context that had equity in mind per se, right? You're saying peace, but I'm going to say equity as well. I mean, there wasn't an understanding that women would have representation, or that people of color would have representation, which includes African Americans, people of African descent at that time, who were enslaved or free, or Native American people, or the large group of Latinx folks who were already inhabiting the continent, but were not part of the narrative at that time. Yeah, I think that's right. I don't think there was an understanding that this sort of dream was for everyone at that time.
I'd like to piggyback on that a little bit by saying that the ways in which the founders enshrine private property and its importance also really nicely illustrates sort of the beginning inequality. At that point, you know, the labor of Black people had already been robbed for 2 centuries. There's an incredible disparity in existing wealth at that time. And the enshrinement of private property then prevents, well, it doesn't prevent, but it makes it so that even those steps taken in the future to attempt to create this more equality or greater equality is always hamstrung by the fact that when those steps are taken forward, the differential in ownership, in property exists. And so until the Constitution can be used to redress things that are brought forward historically, then it just replicates the inequality that existed from the starting point.
Okay, thank you. I so appreciate what you're saying, Blake, in terms of when we institutionalize inequity, that is ongoing, and it's meant to be ongoing until there is redress within that framework itself. And that is actually one of the functions of the Constitution, right or wrong. It is one of the functions is to be a solid anchor, and without redress, it's designed to do what it's always done, right? So I take very seriously what you said. Life, liberty, and property are the things that are enshrined in the Constitution. And people will often say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but the pursuit of happiness doesn't come into it. It's life, liberty, and property. Property is a core and fundamental value in the United States, more important perhaps than life, the provisions for protecting life. And so, and that is that emphasis on protecting private property has led to a host of inequities that we probably don't have time to cover all the way through today. So where are we going here? So I want to just bring up one more question or idea. I saw this just yesterday, I think, a discourse about making America great again. So making America great again is sort of a narrative, arc, or the series of ideas. What I mean when I say narrative is like, what's the big conversation we're having on TV, right? What's the big conversation that's happening in the United States? And Make America Great Again, which has been a campaign slogan for President Trump, has not been embraced wholly by all groups. So I want to talk about that in the context of the current uprising and the conversation that we're having here, because I think it's important. Words have power, and these symbols have meaning. And so I just want to play for you this clip, and I'd like to talk about it. What do we mean when we're saying Make America Great Again, and how do we hear this perhaps differently?
So Sarah, you need to go into the bar so that we can hear this. We can't hear it.
Oh, you can't hear it?
Sharing, and then check the box that we can hear the video and reshare.
Okay, sorry, Mary, I missed part of it. What's that?
So stop sharing the screen, and then click on share screen, and there's a box to the left that you can check that says share video.
Computer sound. Got it. Thank you, Mary, for those clear instructions. I appreciate that. So now I'm sharing again, and here we go. Good, because I didn't want you to hear that first part anyway.
Take a look on just what the MAGA slogan means to different people.
You've coined the phrase, Make America Great Again.
Right.
When has America been great for African Americans in the ghetto of America? Are you aware of how tone deaf that comes off to African American community?
Well, I can say this, we have tremendous African American support.
Well, I mean, your statement is, though, make it great again. So historically, the African American experience, especially in these ghettos that have been redlined, historically, these ghettos that have systemically been set up, you have yet to address and acknowledge that there's been a race problem in America.
So if you go, well, I hope there's not a race problem. I can tell you there's none with me, because I have great respect for all races, for everybody.
We turn now to Pastor Carl Day from Philadelphia. I should mention he served.
Okay, so I just wanted to discuss that briefly. When we have a big narrative or the kind of TV conversation in this country with a phrase like Make America Great Again, what are we looking back to? So we've been talking about, the framing, sort of this understanding of the core values of our country originally. And when we're talking about making it great again, what are we saying? What is being said by President Trump and others when they say Make America Great Again? What is the intention?
I think they just want to send everybody who isn't here legally. They just want to send everybody back. They just want to have just white people living here. But when I heard him saying, you know, make America great again, I got to thinking, so does it mean everybody's going to leave and they're just going to give the lands back? Because I do agree, when has America ever been great? So that's what I got from that.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny. Something you said caused me to think about something my son said about that. My son, Mikey, he's 11. He said, if everyone is going, if all the immigrants are going to leave, then only 1% of us will be left, right? Those of us who are Native American will stay here.
Yeah.
Everybody else has to go. So anyway,
Exactly.
I thought that was kind of a charming thought. But yeah, so what you're saying is, to you, what you hear in Make America Great Again is that's really a topic about immigration and sort of a dig at folks who are here who are undocumented. Others, what do you hear when you hear that statement?
Excuse me. To me, it seems the way the politics of the race is being framed in a way as to present it as an Americanism, as a nationalistic movement, which we've seen in other countries, that point of philosophy to. And so if you look at it in that form, shape, it's almost as a guise for other agendas. But I'm not one to say, so I'm not really clear on the politics, but from what I've heard, it seems as presented as a nationalistic movement for that political, for that party.
So nationalistic meaning we're going to take care of our own first, America first, and sort of withdrawing from more of a global conversation. So stepping back from that global understanding of ourselves and really focusing on domestic issues. Is that what you mean by nationalistic?
Yes, to put it clearly, yes, you did a very well job. That's what I see, and it could be a guise for other things, because in the political system, there's always misdirections, and there's always one word means another thing, or there's always these intricacies that we have to watch out for.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I appreciate those comments. Others, what do you think is the intention? So this statement is meant to attract some people too. What does it mean? What does it intend?
Sarah, this is Miguel.
Hi, Miguel.
It could be interpreted different ways. Depends who you ask. Yeah. For me, when it comes from our president, and by the way he is behaving, demonstrating what he really is and believes, for me, because of his actions, it means go back to segregation, back to slavery, back to what white men will make the policies and we do what they want us to do, back to that white power. I mean, you can see that. If it was someone else, I would say probably something different. But because he's the one saying it, because of his action, making fun of people with disabilities, making fun of women, calling people nicknames, and I mean, you've seen everything. I cannot really understand why we're even supporting this kind of behavior. That's what it means. Go back to what white people privilege. That's I can summarize that in those few words.
Thank you, Miguel. I appreciate your point of view.
Sarah, I wanted to make sure, I see that Israel Benincourt put something in there, and he said to extrapolate Make America Great Again needs to be understood in the context of Trump's policy, refers to economic prosperity ending violence in the Middle East, and restoring social cohesion. I just want to make sure that that point was brought out.
Yeah. Okay, so restoring social cohesion, making sure that we have our interests protected in the Middle East. And what was the third one? I missed the third one.
Restoring social cohesion.
Yeah, social cohesion. Got it. Okay. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think, and it's useful because this is a good time to hear multiple points of view about what it means.
So I think I do a lot of work with lots of people, many of whom believe in saying that they want to make America great again. And these are people that I really care about and want to continue working with, but they have a very different perspective on what I think. And so I've tried to listen to what they mean when they say that. And it's really interesting that many of them talk about how things were good until there were riots in the 1960s and until birth control came in the 1960s. Before there was birth control, women knew their place in the home and they had babies and they weren't trying to leave the family to go and work. And these same people say to me that this was a time before people were openly angry and hostile about the American government. People need to behave and obey the laws and not protest. They see peaceful, many of these people that I talk to, because I push them, do you see peaceful protesting as not good? And they say, oh no, before that all started, before there were peaceful protests, America was great.
On that city's Racial Reconciliation Committee, which the mayor formed.
So for me, it means going back to a time, and property does have a lot to do with it. When you, as a white person, you would seek to live in a safe place where nobody was going to hurt you. When I was little, I thought I'd grow up and marry a man and live in the white suburbs and never really think about women's reproductive choices. And so I think that race has a lot to do with it, but I also think that living a life where, as a white person, particularly a white man, your world is a lot easier. You are able to claim whatever you have always had in the past in terms of property and privilege. It's been really hard for me to accept this. And when people say, when Trump makes, like Miguel, you talked about how he made fun of people who were disabled and said mean things about women or talks about grabbing their pussy. You didn't say that, but he does that. And these are people who say, oh, that's just Trump being Trump. And I see the faces of my students who can't understand why people who are supposed to be the mature ones running our country are letting this person get away with saying that, and they still invest in his leadership. So it causes them a lot of suffering.
Thank you, Christina. It's good to see you, and I sure appreciate you sharing.
Yeah. I miss you, Sarah.
Yeah,
it's
me
really
too.
Good to see
it's so
you.
good to see you. Yeah, I so appreciate you sharing your perspective, and like you, I think it's important to listen carefully to what the intention is. People say when they identify with that feeling. You know, if there was a time that was more felt more secure, and wanting to return to that time. The context, the reason I bring it up here in this, oh dang it, I'm having a hard time leaving this slide without running the video again, so sorry about that. The reason I bring it up in this context actually is because I think when we're talking about the Constitution, it's always our sort of sense, let's go back to the beginning when things were good and we wanted things to, when everything was right, you know, in the beginning, what was the intention and so on. And so I wanted to sort of play with that idea or press on that a little bit and say, within the Constitution itself, or the discourse, or the big TV conversation around the Constitution, often we're talking about returning to some ideal time, and what I'm wondering is that the ideal that we actually want to return to? If the Constitution gives us the ability to seek redress, if we are able to move forward together as a people, how can we do that in a good way together? I guess that's kind of the idea I wanted to bring up. Should the intention of the original framers matter at this stage? And I want to ask that. I mean, truly, does the intention of the original framers matter? How about our intention, the intention we have now? You know, how do we weigh those things?
If you meaning that we should interpret it from the point of view of our framers, or from an interpretation that reflects our times now?
That's what I'm asking.
What I was trying to find online was something that I had a class in, and they mentioned Henry Thoreau, his idea that when you were discussing this, I thought it was poignant to mention that Thoreau argued, I'm going to quote from a web page on .org, Black History Monthly, Civil Disobedience. Thoreau argued that the government must end its unjust actions to earn the right to collect taxes from its citizens. As long as the government commits unjust actions, he continued, conscientious individuals must choose whether to pay their taxes or to refuse to pay them and defy the government. And in this article, Thoreau declared that if the government required people to participate in injustice by obeying unjust laws, then people should break the laws, even if they ended up in prison. Under a government which imprisons, quoting Thoreau, under a government which imprisons any unjustly. He asserted, quote again, Thoreau, the true place for a just man is also a prison. And so his ideas, his points of view seem to resonate for this time. And
all right.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Thank you, Ellen. I really appreciate your comments. It's what I hear you saying now is sort of in a bigger conversation than one we've had here today. Instead of thinking about whether a protest is legal or not, sort of looking up and saying, is the context just, right? Because sometimes people are going to violate the law for a higher justice, right? So they're going to violate laws that are unjust. And so in those times we have massive uprising, like now, where people are really, they're behaving in a way consistent with the injustice that they have observed and experienced themselves. And we're now seeing that. So I want to close with just this question. How do we move forward together as people who share this space, community together within these national boundaries? All of us, regardless of our status, live here together in community. How do we move forward in a good way?
Sarah, we need to keep talking about it without any how do you say that, reservations of being fired or go to jail or get labeled. I mean, we need to keep talking about it in at every chance that we have, openly and objectively, we have to not just ignore it and pretend nothing is there. Not just close your eyes and say, hey, I don't see anything, right? We need to keep talking about it until, for many more years, unfortunately. This is gonna keep happening. But we need to keep talking about it. So that's what I think.
I want to thank Heritage University and all the faculty and staff here for providing a safe place for students to talk about this. Universities have historically provided that space for civil discourse to occur, and Heritage has done that, and to a deeper degree in favor of social justice. So I want to voice, as a person living in this community here in White Swan, thanks to Heritage for providing that space for students to have that conversation, have these difficult conversations and sometimes awkward conversations.
Where's Gloria, my friend? I want you guys to follow me with this symbol over here. That means we all together on this. You do it, we all together. If you don't do it, it's up to you. But I see a lot of you guys doing this. So we need to stick together because we live in this world. Whatever happens to the world is going to affect us all. Unless you plan to go to the moon or somewhere else, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon. So solidarity, equity, thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, I also want to just thank our students for being present, and for those people who, faculty, students, staff, who are willing to take part of this challenging conversation. It's difficult to talk about race. It's difficult to talk about race in the United States. And from my point of view, it is the thing that leads to resolution, actually, ultimately, is sitting down together and working through what we have to work through. So we have tumult and we have revolution, and at the end of that, we make peace together. So I'm thankful for this opportunity for each person in your intention to come together and be willing to share and have this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Sarah, for a great talk and interaction, and the invitation to continue the conversation.
Good to see you all.
Good to see you.
All my